Welcome to Underground Workshop, a channel dedicated to DIY crafts and projects. It's called Underground Workshop because it's a space in my basement that I've converted into a little workroom area. Actually, originally it was a workroom for the original house inhabitants we bought the home from, Elsa and Leo Vaderlaus. This is Leo's former workshop. It's got some of his handiwork and paint stains. And then my history throughout my life has been inspired by my grandparents and growing up, learning to make things with our hands and fixing things. My grandfather Hanley was on my mother's side was a carpenter, as was his father before him, and then my grandpa on my father's side could build anything. He had his own workshop and did all his own work on his cars. So I grew up with that ethic, and I'm trying to help my son Benny get inspired to do some of that stuff for himself, and then anybody else who feels like they want to pick up a craft or make something. Hopefully this will give you the encouragement to do it yourself. So we have a workshop in here, and you'll be getting a tour of some of the tools and equipment as we get through them. One of the most important things that I have is my skull cap. This belonged to my grandpa. My grandma made it for him. Whenever he was working on something, he always wore one of these. I inherited when he passed away. So to think of the first project that we want to make is going to be a picture frame, because I've been making a lot of those, and Benny and I have been working on a few ourselves, so we figured that'd be a good place to start. So we're going to be taking a 2x4 and cutting it up and measuring it out, and then we've got all the pieces that we need to do that. Plus we've got some art here that we're going to be framing just as an example, and then I've got a couple other really kind of interesting ideas with some customizations to the frame that I wanted to work on. So the first thing we'll be doing is measuring everything out and cutting out the rough wood for the frames. To measure our things, the calculations need to be, relatively accurate. There's a bit of math that goes into it. This paper is 7 by 5.5, so you write down 7 by 5.5, and then we're going to get some wood out and trim it down with our bandsaw, and we're going to make an allowance for the edges so that your art sits in the middle of the frame once it's flipped over. We'll build a whole frame for it and a mat, and we've got some plastic sheeting that we can use as a nice protective cover on the very outside of it. So, and we've got some cool ideas for some improvements on some art styles. Hopefully they work out as well. Over the years in all these projects, we keep the wood that we can when we're finished so we can recycle them into other projects. There's no hurry, and you end up with the blade stays straight. I've noticed if you push it a little bit, the blade will kind of bow out and you'll get a wiggly line. So that's not as great. So we're going to just cut some rough slats before we even measure it. This will be the wood that I'm using for the frame, but I'm not measuring anything yet. So we've cut our 2x4 down into some blank shapes here, and so now what we got to do is figure out. I really like how this turned out, cross-cutting 2x4s. This wood has some really nice knots that I'm going to try to keep that'll stain up really well. And then we've cut with the grain, so instead of the tight lines of grain, we get to see kind of the wavy movement patterns of it. That's going to look really cool. But in order to get our lengths down, what we need to do is imagine that we've got the picture frame. This is just a rough idea of what it would look like, and then the underside of it's the front of it. So what we'll do is we'll just eyeball what will look right. This will make more sense when we start putting it together. Every single frame I've ever built, I've learned a better and easier and more efficient way of doing it, and so all I'm really going to be doing is eyeballing this part. But then we've got so if we put it in about an inch, so we need to add an inch to both sides of our art on all 4 sides. So we had an original size for our picture was 7 by 5.5, plus an inch on each side is going to be 9 long and 7.5 tall. So we're going to take those measurements and we're going to mark out on our wood here 9 inches. Make a tick mark here. And then these are going to be 45-degree angles. So when we glue it all together, we're going to have what looks like a simple 45-degree joint. So we're measuring from the top here, and then we'll make our 45s here and here. And then on this board, we're going to need 7.5. So we're going to make our tick mark here. And again, these will be 45s here and here. And we're going to cut 2 pieces of wood each, so we just need to make the one cut. So we'll cut both of these boards at 45 here and at here. And then we're going to cut both of these boards at 9, here and here. So let's get the miter saw out and make those cuts, and then we can work on gluing. Historically, I had just used a plastic El Cheapo miter box. I made probably 25 frames using this thing. But the problem is, with it being plastic, this thing gets a little bit wiggly, and with this wiggle times 4 cuts turns into a lot of problems. So fortunately, I've made an upgrade, which would be this compound miter saw that we've got here. And this is going to cut everything exactly the way we need it. So we got this thing, we're ready to glue it together. We're going to set the initial gluing of it together. It's important to kind of be aware of which side you want. I mean, it's pretty obvious that I'm going to want this side being the visible side, so I'm going to flip everything over to the back side just to do some work on it. I've got some wood glue here. Make sure there's plenty of glue on each corner. So just rub a little glue on there. Make sure it's nice and sticky. Staple holding place. Pull them out later. We just watch the glue's drying. So this last one, I'm gonna glue both sides of this together at once, because once we get one side nailed in, it's like that Young Ones video where Neil nails himself to the crucifix but can't figure out how to put the last nail in. So we can't put glue on if we've already stapled the third side. Okay. And now we wait for the glue to dry. So we've cut our pieces down here, and the reason why we're doing that is because we're going to build a frame back holder for these. Cut them to size. It doesn't matter if you've got like oak or some nice hardwood on the front. These can be pine in the back. I don't think that should matter too much. But that's the idea. We're going to put our matting and our plastic or glass in the front of it. Then our art and all that will fit inside this box that we built. It's pretty slick. We have some leftover copper wire from when I did the electrical actually in this room, put up the lights above us. I got big thick 10 gauge wire and had a bunch left over because I didn't know how much I'd need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hammer this I'm going to hammer it flat on both sides all the way down, and then we'll clip off pieces to use for those braces. copper pieces are going to go across each other here, and on the last one I did, I learned that they don't quite sit right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect these two with a pencil mark on each corner, and then when I'm going to Dremel out a little channel, and then when I put the copper wire in, it'll have somewhere to seat inside there. So each one of these holes is going to get its own little channel. This part should be pretty easy. I just got to bend this in to where that's going to sit flat, and I should be able to kind of eyeball it. And cut it off here at the same length. Nice. All right, 7 more to go. So we got everything set here and ready to go for the next phase, which is staining it. I prefer staining it. Like I said, I want to see how this grain comes out. I mean, it's not an awesome wood, but it's still pretty good. So we've got a couple ideas, and Benny picked, and I agree with him, this lighter golden pecan stain, but we've got all kinds of stains that we'll use. If it's, you know, especially this stuff I like, if you've got a good wood like ash or oak where it's, you know, it's all it does is really bring out the grain but doesn't change the color of it. But I'm going to stain the whole thing, inside, outside, top. I don't usually worry about the back because that's a little busted up anyway. But let's take it outside and stain it. Okay, this is where your professional YouTubers show their well-ventilated workspace and single-use applicators, but we just use paper towels. And do it outside. Try to go with the grain of the wood best you can. I mean, so look at that. That's a nice light stain. That looks good. Okay. Okay, so we brought it inside after staining it in this hot late July heat. It probably stayed out there longer than we needed, but that's fine. There's a little bit of stain on this copper, so this is going to end up being a gift. So before I give it away, I'm going to go through and clean all that stuff up. But I think it looks pretty good. Look at that. See all the grain. I think that's probably rot, but I'll take it because it looks pretty. One thing that we kind of didn't spend a whole lot of time doing was talking about you know, these edges. So I cut these out of the original wood I was using, And we're going to build a box like this, and then inside of it you'll see all of our art's going to sit inside, but we're going to build a whole frame and mount and all that stuff there. But just real quick, I'm gonna glue these suckers on, and then we're going to measure out and cut our foam core and our plastic. So, more glue. Okay, so this is glued and we're going to let it dry. On second inspection, really doing this while you're shooting YouTube video has changed a lot of our procedure. This would be like a 3-4 day project for me, letting everything dry, letting everything kind of cure, mulling stuff over before I decided on it. Instead, we've kind of put this together in about 12 hours, the whole thing. So one thing I've learned after watching editing is I need to stop sounding like I'm reading off a list of algebra nomenclature, so I'm going to try to pep it up a bit. Second is it's kind of got a lot more customizations and personality our frame does than I would have preferred. So we're gonna let that dry, and it's gonna look a little wonky. I like wonky. I've seen too many people add way too much stress to their lives trying to make something perfect. I like to be able to look at little projects like this and know right away that I was the one that made them, and if that means that my edges are glued a little weird or my cuts are 100,000% not off, plumb straight, doesn't bother me, makes me happy. So anyway, let's show what we're doing here for measuring and then get into the really stressful bit. Okay, so for this next part we're going to be measuring some critical cuts. We've got an allowance of about 1 inch, but I'd still rather try to get it as close to possible without I'm going to cut it several times. So we got our trusty metal ruler, and we've got our tape measure. So if I'm looking at this and I want to fill the inside of this with a piece of plastic and a piece of foam core, then if I measure it down here at the bottom, it is a little under 6.5, and if I measure it up here at the top, it's a little right on 6.5. So if I say, if I do 6 1/4, 6 and just under 1/2. So I'm going to write that down. 6 and less than 1/2. And we're going to measure the top. Top should be about the same too. It's going to be 8 3/4 on the dot. So here's where, in my storied history of frame building, I've ran into the most amount of trouble. This final assembly. There's a lot of stuff that can be meh, but this one really needs to be right on. So we're going to take our measurements of the inside of the frame. We have 6 and just under 1/2. 6, and there's our 1/2 mark. So if we do it here, that ought to be just under 1/2. And then flip it around and do the same on this side. So keeping the edge of this against the table, and also keeping this edge of the square on there. 6 and just under 1/2. Yeah, let's cut this out.
Do you remember all these edits?
Okay, we're going to cheat here a little bit. Instead of measuring out everything, we know how big we need it. This piece of foam core is absolutely the right size. We'll just use it as a template. Let me show you this plastic, because this is cool stuff. So this is just, I forget what they told me. It's probably written on a receipt somewhere. But just plastic. It's shiny on one side, and then the other side, you peel off the plastic. Okay. So we got everything done on the frame so far. We got the back end. We've got, we have to determine which side now we want the top to be, because our art's got a top and a bottom. So I kind of like the knot over here and this grain up here. So I'm going to keep this down here. And that's going to be our top. So now it's time to put everything together. We've got our plastic cut, we have our foam core, we've got our art. The much satisfying part of this is peeling off the... I've been loving you the best I can, the best I can. Oh yeah. That's going to go in first. And then next is going to be our art, so keeping in mind which side's top on that. Set that in there. Put our foam core on top of that. And we'll just double check it to make sure everything's lined up. That looks pretty good. So, got our handy dandy stand in. And then I've got these little finishing nails. Set out a few of those, these little nails. So we're going to probably put in a few of them. But we do this by just going in a bit, hammering them down flat. Okay, so check our top again. So now we've got everything put together. I want to put something that we can hang it up with. I've got these cute little super tiny eye hooks, and I have actual frame wire, but this piece is got a DIY feel to it a little. So we're already using reclaimed shop wood, and then what I've got is just speaker cable. I have miles of this stuff, and I stripped the casing off of it, just the copper wire here for it. So kind of find where I think it would fit best. This would be another good one to measure, but I don't know if it's that critical. And I'm just going to use a staple gun, staple the wire in, boop. 2 staples on either side. Okay, that'll hold. One of the last bits of finishing I want to do on this is I already stained this part of it, and that's kind of a little, could get some cleaning up. So I've got this wire brush on my Dremel. I'm just going to hit it with the wire brush here. We'll polish it up. So this is it. We hung it up on the wall here so you could just see that it was completed. It turned out okay. It turned out okay. I've got a bunch of these. I made these woodblock prints. Maybe we'll do a video on woodblock printing. But I've got a bunch of these arts and I want to frame them all. I think next time for the ones in the future, I'm going to make this a little thinner. The whole thickness of the frame is way too thick. And since that's all just done on the bandsaw, I can adjust that. I think it'd look a little better if it wasn't so bulky. And then also these accent pieces, that was a fun idea. Maybe I'll keep practicing with it. It's not, they look like those staples that you pull out of like the bottom of boxes. They don't really look like art. So I'll work on that. But overall, it turned out pretty well. Hopefully this inspires people to kind of make their own stuff with their hands if you've got a little bit of the equipment and time, and most of it's just believing you can do it if you get started, so, and then sticking with it till it's done. But that's it. This is it for video number 1. Been really enjoying spending the time with my behind the scenes producer, director, talent, craft service, wardrobe, editor. Enjoyed spending the time doing that, and hopefully we can do these more on the regular. So that's it for today, and thanks for watching, and witty catchphrase.